It's May 18th, 2001, and another remarkable event is about to be uncovered by Arion, Rebecca, and Olly, the Retrospectors.
It was today in history in 2001 that the soon-to-be cultural juggernaut Shrek landed in cinemas in the US in what would turn out to be a landmark day for ogres, wisecracking donkeys, and the members of Smash Mouth.
Yeah, and it didn't just open in some cinemas. It opened in 3,587 theatres across the United States, marking the largest release for any Dreamworks animated film at the time. Theatres saw this really strong turnout, and not just from children, crucially, but also from teens and also adults who were interested in the idea of this film that is an animation, so it looks like a kid's film, but it had this sharp humour and kind of self-referential attitude. And by the Sunday night, it had already raked in $42 million, dethroning The Mummy Returns. That was at the top of the box office at the time.
Yeah, they knew they had a hit on their hands. They'd taken it to Cannes. I mean, it was the first animated film to compete for the Palme d'Or in more than 5 decades. So, you know, they certainly believed they had a hit on their hands, but that had not been the history of the film. In fact, it had been in development for so long that writers who were assigned to this project to polish up the script yet again referred to the Shrek department of Dreamworks as the gulag. It had been optioned for like 10 years. And I guess a lot of people felt like, didn't we already do this? Didn't Hollywood already do this in The Princess Bride? Hasn't William Goldman already done this? We've done polishing up fairy tales and doing a modern spin on them. What's left to say?
It's based on a book, a 1990 children's book called Shrek, with an exclamation mark, like a shit Broadway musical, which I think is quite charming. But Steven Spielberg had purchased the rights to it in 1991, and he envisioned it then as being a traditional, hand-drawn animated feature with Bill Murray and Steve Martin as the voices of Shrek and Donkey, respectively. And then in 1995, the project was turned over to the then new DreamWorks Studios, of which Spielberg was a co-founder, but it hadn't yet released any films at this point. They'd formed a partnership with a computer animation firm called Pacific Data Images to make computer animated films to rival Pixar, which hadn't released a movie yet either. It had released several short films and was about to release Toy Story. So DreamWorks knew that they had to be competing with this. But the first one to be... I've got a memory about ants. You remember the film Ants?
I love Ants.
I remember my mum brought us back a videotape copy of it from... She'd been on like a day trip to Southampton, and I remember sitting down and watching it and being like, this is crap. But now they went into production on Shrek, but it'd be another 6 years before it made it to screens.
Well, and part of the reason for that was originally they'd cast Chris Farley, who actually died before the end of the production, but he'd already recorded like 90% of his dialogue before he passed away in December of 1997. And so it was at that point that they brought in Mike Myers to be Shrek. And Mike Myers originally started out doing the Shrek voice as an American, but then halfway through he kind of decided that actually his comedic Scottish brogue that had worked for him in a bunch of films, including the Austin Powers films, would be a good solution to this particular question. And so he's talked to DreamWorks and he was like, can I just do the whole thing over? And at great expense, they let him. It was another $4 million of re-recording, reanimating, getting in a dialogue coach, not that they totally nailed it. And all of that contributed to this blowing out of time that meant that Shrek was massively delayed versus where it was going to be released originally.
But I think giving Mike Myers the creative license to do that was only possible because Jeffrey Katzenberg was running DreamWorks. So Jeffrey Katzenberg had been the head of Walt Disney Studios during this golden period where kind of from the dumps of the 70s and 80s, Fox and the Hound and Basil the Great Mouse Detective and all that sort of thing. Under Katzenberg's tenure, they'd had, The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast and leading all the way up to The Lion King. So he was like the hottest animation producer, really. He'd fallen out with Disney because they'd wanted Michael Eisner to take over the company rather than him. And so he then imbued Shrek with all of the knowledge that he'd picked up working at Disney. But of course, the whole thing is a parody of Disney and Disneyland. and Michael Eisner. So he managed to put his own personal animosity into this project, specifically in the form of Lord Farquaad, which sounds quite a lot like Farquaad, and Michael Eisner's doppelganger in animated form, as voiced by John Lithgow, and loads of jokes the whole way through, which if you knew Michael Eisner, you realise were about Michael Eisner. Not very subtle, but it meant that it gave him a personal stake in this project, which I suppose unleashed his inner competitiveness. And so I think like another $4 million to get the joke right. For him, that was probably worth it.
And it was the script that I think really worked. I mean, it's packed with kind of adult humour, but without becoming glib and ironic and soulless, which is a balance that pretty much every animation since has tried to emulate. And I think part of the reason that it's so hard to, looking back on Shrek, I feel like I'm doing a historical documentary, looking back at Shrek. But it's like glib irony has become the default tone, not just for animated movies, but look at stuff like the Marvel movies. That exact sort of like, well, that just happened tone has become the go-to. So you sort of lose sight of how refreshing it felt as an adult to watch Shrek at that time.
The co-directors of this film, Vicky Jensen and Andrew Adamson, did not have children themselves. And I think that also really helped them make a film that they would actually want to see. The other thing as well that was really influential was the pop music. And we mentioned Smash Mouth. I mean, of course, there's also like Leonard Cohen in the form of a cover of Hallelujah in this. There's the Monkees, I'm a Believer. And the soundtrack was massively popular in and of itself as a record. And that started, as I understand it, not as a creative choice, but because it's quite typical when you're making computer animation to cut sequences to pop music. So you get the kind of pace that you want. And it was then when watching these cuts that the directors chose to, if not option the songs that were in the rough cuts, then find other pop songs that had that tempo. Because instantly that separated it out from Disney, didn't it? Robin Williams had been a star voice in Aladdin doing impersonations and stuff, but that was still in the context of a Disney fairy tale. The thing that made this different to something like that was that pop music. It felt like you were watching a film that wasn't animated at all. And
also people are still, it's 2001, people are still going to see what the computer effects look like. It's still new and it's still fresh. And scenes like the scene where Shrek showering in mud, that was a level of attention to detail and a level of CGI effect that hadn't been seen on screen before.
Yeah, apparently Fiona's hair was phenomenal because they had animated thousands of strands individually.
Yeah. And her velvet dress, I read as well, catches the light in different forms.
Yeah, and people are like, this is incredible. And it's funny to look back on it. I went and watched some of it, and it actually does look like early CGI now, whereas at the time it would have looked absolutely groundbreaking.
Although one thing I will say, to its detriment perhaps, is that I do think some of the jokes that are clearly for teenagers and adults make the film less watchable for very young children. You know, I've sat and watched Shrek with like a 4-year-old, and it's not the thing of there's 2 levels of jokes and they're being entertained, but they're also missing some of the references. It's that they're actually a bit traumatized when the gingerbread man is being tortured. The attitude of the thing is very cynical. Shrek literally wipes his bum on a fairy tale at the beginning of the story. And so it's kind of, I think it's funny if you're 9, but, you know, to be fair, it doesn't do what Disney does of appealing to absolutely everybody because of that edge. You know, the edge is sometimes a bit unpleasant and mean-spirited and sort of tells children, you know, if you like fairy tales the way they're traditionally told, you know, you're a bit fey, you're a bit sad. Yeah. Look at the cool way we're doing it, which I think is kind of actually a bit crap to give to a 3-year-old, you know.
Well, and also the gross out humour is a bit alienating for probably like very older audiences as well. Like they've sort of hit this target market of 9 to 15-year-olds perfectly. They can really enjoy it. But people younger and older might find some, I don't know, like Shrek pulling wax out of his ear and lighting it as a candle. It sort of works, but you're like, it's not the greatest joke of all time, you know?
I mean, we're nitpicking. It's obviously a masterpiece.
Yes.
And I mean, 2001, so I was 20 at this point, and I think I went to see it in the cinema with my dad, who would have been 55. And the fact that that trip happened with no children present at all does speak to what it does, doesn't it?
Did you enjoy it? Were you laughing in your seats?
Yes, totally. I think my dad was brought in by the fact that Shrek is a Yiddish word. I think he would have liked more.
He was expecting something very different. Yeah.
The other thing that this did, of course, is completely solidified the trend for star casting. You know, as you mentioned, Toy Story was contemporaneous with this, so that, to be fair, did have Tim Allen and Tom Hanks in it. But I think Shrek taking 3 big stars and putting them in a cartoon. Because I remember the first, when you saw the titles and it had their names like it was a proper movie rather than they just happened to do the voice, that felt new. And of course, that is now Madagascar and Minions and everything. And it's interesting to note with that in mind what the cast were paid. Did you see this?
No.
So for Shrek, they each received $350,000, which is not bad for 18 hours work.
Yeah.
For the sequel, $10 million each.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's a call that you'd want your agent to take, isn't it?
Yeah, but here's a remarkable thing. Like, 2001 was such a huge year for blockbusters that Shrek, having made almost $500 million, was only the 4th highest grossing film of the year, because the top 3 were Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, and Monsters, Inc. So this really was like a behemoth year. Smash Mouth did the best out of this one, though.
Now,
This episode first aired last year exclusively to members of Club Retrospectors.
Join today and unlock a new episode this Sunday.
Patreon.com/retrospectors